I want to extend all of you a warm welcome to this fireside chat with the co-founder of one of our iconic new age Indian firm. Everybody is already familiar with it, but I think this would be a great opportunity for us to listen from the person who started it all. And I also want to thank, along with Divya, I also want to thank my colleague, Professor Srivardhini Jha, for helping us moderate this session and also bring in insights that I think only faculties are suited in the sense that, because of their background in research and also Professor Vardhini's own interest with NSR Cell. I just thought I would mention a few things about NSR Cell and our journey so far. We are one of the oldest academic incubators in the country. We are about 20 years old. And one thing that has stayed common over these 20 years is our commitment to women entrepreneurship. I think I would say that, with a lot of pride, that almost 70% of all the startups that we have incubated have had at least one woman co-founder. And I think that has been our enormous achievement has been phenomenal. And also our commitment has continued ever since the first year that we started. We run programs ranging from very early stage, ideation stage for women entrepreneurs, all the way up to women enterprises wanting to scale. And one of the program that we are talking about and the scale up, which is the program that we run jointly with Goldman Sachs, is our 10,000 Women program. And our programs not just cater to the urban women entrepreneur, in the sense that we had started initially with that focus, but in the last few years, we had extended our focus to peri-urban and semi-urban entrepreneurs as well. And with the COVID happening last year, we also had been able to reach out to a lot of women entrepreneurs in deep inside part of India as well. In fact, next year, we would have also a fully fledged rural women entrepreneurship program as well. So it's sort of, we cover the entire spectrum of women entrepreneurs in this country. And I just thought I'll mention a little bit about our Scale Up Women program. And I think the program has been running for 3 years now, and we have been able to help 750 women entrepreneurs to grow, ranging from people with 35 lakhs of revenues growing to 2 or 3x after the program gets over. And we also have been able to bring in a whole lot of experts at their beck and call. So it's largely a range of knowledge sessions, mentoring sessions, and of course, access to some of the inspirational stories. And one of that is what we're going to be hearing today in terms of the fireside chat. So I really encourage people who have not had an interaction with NSR Cell before, please reach out to us. And if you do have any ideas or anything at or any stage of development, we'll be more than happy to help. Thank you, and I look forward to this chat.
Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing such a good brief about what we're doing here at NSR Cell. Now I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Mr. Sanjay Chatterjee. He is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Goldman Sachs in India. So over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot. So good to be here, although virtually. So as many of you heard, I'm also an alma mater at IIM Bangalore, so spent 2 glorious years here. And I keep thinking when I can get back to campus. I know we have a board meeting next week, which I had actually long back put in my calendar that I'm going to physically go to Bangalore, and now it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So glad to be here today, and Professor Venki, Professor Jha, thank you. I know you all do a lot to make this program successful, and I think all of us at Goldman are very grateful for that. Divya, warm welcome to you. And I think a lot of what is changing around us has to do with what you all have built. It's a great story. It's a great creation. And and it kind of fits in well with what's happening around us, because clearly I think the whole digital pace has accelerated because of what we see of the COVID pandemic around us. And I think this decade is going to be very important for all of us in India, because it's going to define a very different pace of growth. It's going to define how we adopt technology, how we really get onto this whole digital curve, the new digital curve, how we adopt AI. And so these are going to be very defining trends beyond what we are obviously going to see as part of regular growth or the industrial sector. So which is why it dovetails very beautifully to our guest today, Divya, who will share a lot more about this shift that is happening. And then, of course, you have a lot of new global trends around us. Geopolitically, a lot of things have changed. Climate continues to be a very important aspect for us. And that is something that everybody has to think through. And obviously, the pandemic has hastened all these shifts that are happening around us. We no longer have that much time and to really sit back and really think, okay, I'm going to plan this for next year. Now it's just happening all around us so quickly that we have to really get on with it very quickly. And I think the audience today, all of you, is really the most important segment in India today, because the informal sector is really going to define where India goes in the next 10 years. And all of you really represent that. And I know things are difficult because particularly now with this revised set of lockdown measures, a lot is changing all the time, and all the variables have changed. Skills have to be thought through very differently now. So in that context, I mean, the work that you all are doing, I think we feel very good about whatever we as Goldman Sachs, along with IIM Bangalore, are trying to really do to boost this whole approach to women's entrepreneurship. And I think if you look back as to what we have been trying to do in the last 1 year or so, obviously in the beginning we were very focused on how to deal with people who have been hurt by the pandemic. So we spent at least more than $1 million just trying to make sure that people had basic resources, food and provisions at the early time of the pandemic. And then we stretched that to see how to help our whole 10,000 women community, because now we have a very large community, having started this program globally in 2008, but then we've done a very successful partnership, first with ISB and then now with IIM Bangalore for a few years. And the scope of this is obviously expanding. And one decision we took obviously last year was to make this available online, the whole 10,000 Women program, which is free. And that was the right thing to do. And I'm sure Divya will agree that given everything that they have done, that this was absolutely the right thing to do at this time of the environment. And then, of course, we have this whole, those of you who have been through the IIM Bangalore program are going to be the whole classroom sessions run by very eminent faculty within the IIM platform. And that, of course, is also free. And then we did something for our alumni, which was very specifically focused on how to bring them up the curve or really help them at this time where a lot of the environmental parameters are shifting very rapidly. So we did a fairly intensive 3-day program in March, something that I and a lot of my other partners, including our CEO, participated in, just to make sure that there was a different degree of added inputs and a little bit of a value addition that we could bring into whatever people were already focused on. So this is how we are approaching the current environment, and obviously in a space like this, given everything that's happening around us, it's really great that Divya is with us today. So we all look forward to that chat. And once again, Venki, thank you very much. Glad to be here and glad for everything that you're doing for Goldman Sachs. Thank you.
I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Professor Srivardhani, who will be moderating the event. She's the Associate Professor and Chair of Entrepreneurship in IIM Bangalore. And our speaker here today, Divya Gopalnath, who is the co-founder of Byju's. So over to you both.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Priscilla. And that was also a first for me, posing for a picture online. So I wasn't quite sure where to look and how to smile, what to look at. But anyway, it was very interesting. Thank you for those sort of kickoff talks, Professor Venki and Sanjoy. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I've been looking forward to this chat. We've all been seeing the rise of Byju's over the last decade. And what better time than now as you step into the next decade, you're a decacorn. You've seen phenomenal growth over the 10 years. And of course, in the last 1 year, you've sort of done an orbit shift, if I might say that. So very, very relevant for all of us to understand that scale up journey. And that's sort of going to be the anchoring theme of today's talk. So for the benefit of our audience, what we are going to do today is first spend some time talking about the scale up journey itself, right? What's Byju's doing? What have they done? Having Divya reflect on this phenomenal journey, the meteoric rise of Byju's, and where they're headed, of course. Then we'll also talk about a little bit about Divya as a person, how she has as a leader led this transformation, her sort of insights for entrepreneurs, for women leaders, and so on. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll also reflect more broadly on the entrepreneurial ecosystem, what it means to be in edtech and those type of issues. Okay, so with that, let's jump right in. Divya, you're all set?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So we talk about this journey of going from 1 to 10, right? So it's one thing to sort of get to a point where you have product market fit, but then the challenge of scale up, right? How do you take from 1 to 10 and from 10 to 100 and so on? And it's that journey that Byju's has navigated over the last several years and done it very, very beautifully. So maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about how does an organization really adapt to this phase as you go from being a true startup in the sense that you're still discovering your space to, okay, now you know what you want to do and how do we scale this up? So talk to us about what happens within the organization as you go through this stage.
Yes, you're right. Actually, and if you had asked us 10 years back or even 5 years back, would you see Byju's where it is today? I don't think any of us would have been able to imagine the scale, but we would have definitely been able to envision our mission coming to life, because we've always been about celebrating learning for young children. And that has not changed. If you asked that question to us a decade ago, you ask us that question today, you ask us 10 years from now, I'm sure our mission will be exactly the same. It's about creating an impact on the way children learn. And like you rightly said, when you're going, scaling up an organization this fast, there are both challenges and there are both opportunities at scale, both immense. But I think it's important to capitalize on the opportunities, because that's far more if handled properly. And there are a few things which I think worked for us as we went up as an organization, and we scaled pretty fast. One is that we've always celebrated entrepreneurship. So when I say that, I say, at all levels, you encourage people within the system to experiment, make mistakes, and fail fast, so that when you win big. And why that is important is having this sort of startup kind of mindset, being very quick with execution. It's something that we try and adopt even today. Even though we've become bigger as a company, we want to retain that startup kind of mindset and ideology which we had right from the beginning, where all of us were very hands-on, all of us went deep into our verticals, and we celebrated even little mistakes, learned from it, learned quickly from it, so that we could win. When we win big. And then also to lead by example. So if you look at the founding team, all of us who were there 10 years back are all here even today. And that's important, because that continuum in leadership drives your mission down deep. There is continuum in a sort of what you want to execute, and that is retained throughout the organization only if your leaders do not change. So that's another thing which has really worked in our favor. And if you look at, as we scale from 1 to 10 and now 10 and up, that sort of continuum has really helped us. And the first thing which I said, being very, very fixated on your mission, that should not waver. Whatever we do, all the integrations that we do, the growth that we are aspiring to bring in both organically and inorganically, it should be in such a way that you do not deviate from your core mission of celebrating lifelong learning, of creating self-learners, of making students fall in love with learning. So being fixated on the mission, but being very flexible with its execution. I think that is something which has helped us along the way and is something that we will continue to do.
Okay, great. So a strong core, a stable leadership, continuous experimentation, right? So those are some broad themes that I'm hearing you say. If you could also talk to us about, give us a peek into the decision process. Like, how does decision making change within an organization as you go through this kind of a scale up? Because now there are so many more decisions to be taken, and the organization is getting bigger. How have you sort of dealt with that?
Yes, and especially when you take a decision, there are so many viewpoints. And one thing which we've maintained right from the beginning is to have good diversity even in leadership. And that's important because when you have diversity, you also have a multi-dimensional approach to both problem solving and solution creation. And that's important because when you have different points of view, you address your problems from all directions. But I think like any family would, you can have arguments, you can have different points of opinion, but when you decide what you want to decide based on intuition and a whole lot of numbers. So we are a very teacher led founding team, core to content, believe in what we do, and very very strong in math. So math is everything for us. So everything is number based, right from the TV ads that we do, to the investments that we make. We look at ROI on every single thing. So valuing money has been core to what we do. So we trust numbers. So taking a decision based on numbers and a dollop of intuition. And finally, when we decide what the decision is, everybody rooting for the decision is very important, and not letting ego come in the way. So when you do that, then you know how you can execute this in the best possible way. So you can have discord when you want to decide what you want to do. But once you decide what you want to do, it's important that everybody roots for it.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a very fair point. Back at Sun, when I was working for Sun, we had this term called disagree and commit, right? So you disagree as much as you like, but once you make a commitment to, once the course is set, then, you all march to the same rhythm. So it's a similar sort of philosophy, right? Very interesting. Now, you talked about families and so on, right? Now, when you're in the 0 to 1 phase, companies are really like families. Everybody knows everybody, right? But as you start to become bigger, as you start to grow and bring in more people, that changes, right? So employees don't have the same kind of attention from the founders, same kind of access to, let's say, the founders. How do you manage that transition?
True. No, it's a very valid point, and we've also been, we very proactively try to take care of that. So one thing is that all of us in the founding team are parts of all the WhatsApp groups. So our number is accessible to everybody in the company, and I think that's very very important. And in this digitally enabled world, access becomes so much more easier. So remain and being very approachable. See, when you're a leader, you need to be approachable to the company. So there's any issue, they come to you immediately. So that even at 10, even at 100, the minute it crosses 200, 300, it's almost like this, right? Personalization, even in a class of students, you can do it up to 10 kids, 20 kids. Now, beyond that, you need to have something different which works at scale so that you have personalization which happens, because you need to take care of everybody's need. So we've done it by making sure that there is continuity in the leadership. We've done it by integrating the right kind of people across levels. And see, we are in education. The good thing about education is that it's close to a lot of people. So it's easy to start a mission driven company by attracting the right kind of talent, but the challenge is in staying mission driven. And to do that, what we've done is we've remained we've tried to retain that startup culture within our system, where we encourage people to come up with their ideas, and that's across teams, that's across levels. And we've kind of kept a very flat structure where everybody has visibility to the leadership. So this is possible to do if you think about it. So we knew that this would happen when we scaled up. But then, and also, if you ask me, it's also about, see, there are things which you can go very fast in. There are things which you need to take time and do. So integrating the right kind of people is something that you should take time and do. Because once you have them in at leadership positions, if they are also in line with the kind of DNA that you have, the kind of mission that you have, the kind of culture that you have, it becomes easier to send the message throughout the organization. So having representatives of yourself, creating that, I think is the big step for companies as they scale from 1 to 10 and 10 to 100, creating those little U's within the team all the way down. That is what we need to do. And I've seen that happen because, like you rightly said, there were times when I would know every member of the team by their face and name. Now, and then there was a point where I knew all their names. But today, it's much more difficult. But to take care of that, we've created managers and beyond who can represent you, speak like you, talk like you, and continue the company DNA like you.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And when you talked about hiring people, bringing people into the company, now obviously when you're growing, you're hiring a lot, right? I think today Byju's is at 9,000, 10,000 people, right? So when you bring, how do you balance quality and volumes? You need to bring people in large numbers, but you don't want to compromise on quality. So what's your sort of gyan? What's your recipe for managing this?
Yeah, so we've always been having an unfair advantage in terms of attracting the right kind of talent. So maybe I can start with the like how the company initially was created itself is very very unique. It was with Byju's, I would like to believe, the best students. So we all came together, and if you look at the first, not just the first 10, but the first 200, mostly made up of people who knew that if we can teach differently and if students can learn differently, we'll make an impact. So all like and we have almost minimal attrition at this level. So that was very very important, and I think that's something which was very very unique to what we did when we started up. That being said, education is something that a lot of people are close to. We know that especially in a developing country like India, it is almost the only way to make it big for most of us. So it's easy to find passionate young individuals who want to make a change, who want to impact society. And like I just mentioned before, while scaling, there are things that you need to move fast in and things that you need to take time at doing. Hiring is one thing that is crucial and critical. So I would always overweigh and over index on quality over quantity. So it's not just about the number of people, but the kind of people. So and also see, there are a set of people who've taken you up from 1 to 10, and then there are people who take you up from it may not be the same team that will take you from 10 to 100, but it's critical to have them in your team to help you scale the other factors. So I think so as a founding team, it's critical to find a balance and work on building a culture. What you're building is actually a culture. It's not just a group of people. So when you outsource hiring, what you're actually doing is you're outsourcing culture and losing the founder mentality. So I think what we did is we built up a team of 10 people who had that ownership, who will play and with you and have all the skin in the game at the start. So, and then to scale that, and at one point of time, bringing that team 10 to 100, making that bigger, right kind of people, helping you scale other aspects of the business as we grow organically, as we grow inorganically. And this, I would say, and maybe it's relevant to also talk about the kind of acquisitions and integrations that we are having. So since we value people, and that's very, very important over processes, because processes will anyway fall in place. But if you have the right people and you value them, they're here for the long term. Even in the integrations that we've had recently, three of them, the three biggest ones, no one has left from not just the founding team, but also the top management, because we have managed to integrate people, integrate products, and integrate teams well. So that's very, very important.
Okay, great. I like what you said about if you outsource hiring, you're outsourcing your culture. And I've also heard that from several other founders in how almost to the point of obsession about how careful they are in terms of who they bring into the company, because that sets the tone, that sets the benchmark for who then they bring into the company, right? So your early employees are the ones who then recruit other people, and that's how the tribe grows. So it's really important not to make any kind of a compromise there, and sort of, like you said, maybe give quality the top priority. And even if that takes time, even if that means it moves a little slowly, probably that's the way to go. Okay. So, I mean, you talked about inorganic growth. You've done a series of acquisitions, Osmo, White Hat, and now more recently been in the news for Akash. So beyond the people piece that you already talked about, how have you managed this? What is your sort of recipe for picking up companies, and then how do you integrate them?
Yes, and if you look at the products which they bring and the expertise they bring, it's all very complementary. Everything is in education, but everything is complementary. Maybe I can pick it up one at a time just to give context. I can start with Osmo, which is a US-based company, and they do computer vision technology really well. So they bring in a phygital experience to learning, which brings you the best of offline and online learning in a way. So you have a worksheet and then they detect it, and then you get immediate feedback. So a child who is comfortable in working in their own normal environment of offline gets instantaneous feedback and the best of online. It's almost like a teacher looking over them. we integrated that product into our early learning offering, which we have in association with Disney, within 3 months. So that's how fast we move. So even before we actually went ahead and signed the agreement, the teams are already working together in making sure that when we launched K3, which is kindergarten to grade 3, students have the benefit of what Osmo brings to the table. So that is one of the products. So it's very complementary to what we do. It's not something that, so there are two ways, right? You can say I can build everything on my own, or you can work with experts who have cracked something really well and bring them on board so that you're bigger, better, and stronger together. So the second company is White Hat. Now White Hat had, so it's people who think that, you know, we integrated them just for coding. That's anyway not the right thing. If the kind of model which they have built, the platform which they have for one-on-one learning, which puts the child in the driver's seat, where the teacher's playing the role of a facilitator or a mentor, which is actually what happens in our B schools, which I always believe should happen in schools. You know, if you look at the kind of group discussions which happen and we had a chat on this when we spoke. So it's almost like the child is moving as per their style, because this can happen only in a one-on-one learning environment, getting that dream student ratio come true. So with White Hat, we are planning to go global, and that's actually what you were mentioning, right? We just saw so we are launching in 6 countries in the next month with math and coding one-on-one, which is, and the most important part there is we are taking almost teachers from India to the world. So there are 11,000 all women teachers who are who maybe otherwise would not be able to work in the workforce. So because even though graduates are more than 50% women, we have only 23% representation in the workforce. So tapping into that potential and allowing women to work whenever they want, wherever they want. I think that flexibility is something which White Hat has done beautifully. So, you know, in a way, we're taking teachers to the world. So this is what we did with our integration. And of course, it's one of the many things that we're going to do. I'm just giving an example. And with Akash is the most trusted brand in test preparation. So if you see, because of the pandemic, literally EdTech has been in the spotlight, but it's also redefined what the future of learning is going to look like. It's in fact redefined the way we're going to meet, we're going to teach, we're going to learn. And the future of learning is in a way blended. And with this integration, we hope to create a hybrid model which has the best of offline and online learning, where again a student can decide that, you know, okay, I want to attend my physics classes online. I can do that. I can come to the Center for Math. I can come to meet my peers over the weekend and clear my doubts, or I want to, you know, stay back and meet my teacher online and clear my doubts. So completely giving flexibility to the student to learn as per their style. Because if you ask me frankly, 2 years back, we couldn't have thought of a model like this. But because as unfortunate as the situation is, EdTech has been in a segment of positive relevance. So we are able to do so much more now. So yeah, so if you ask me in one line, it's all very complementary. And acquisitions, all the acquisitions that we've done deep research into how we could integrate together. And I think putting our mind, heart, and thoughts into making this work, the synergy, is the reason why we're able to retain talent even when the integrations happen. That's typically not how acquisitions happen. So here it happens very differently.
Okay, very interesting. And you know, since you talked about the future of learning, maybe I can pick your brain on that. How do you see the role of the teacher? I mean, you have said many times that, you know, first and foremost, you're a teacher yourself. You take pride in being a teacher. So how do you see the role of the teacher changing in the years to come?
Yeah. So the role of the teacher, you can actually have a paradigm shift, if you ask me. But that's when we start creating even more access to online learning, much beyond what it is today. So it can almost be that technology is enabling a teacher to be an even better teacher. At least it made me a better teacher, because so I started out as teaching in offline classes. And then at one point of time, we went completely online, where I was teaching in front of a camera. This is in 2013, 14, 15, when we started recording classes for the app, where we would make imaginary gestures in the air, and then, you know, an awesome R&D team would bring those interactions to life and make it so engaging for students to learn from. And it's almost like magic happening. So you're hooked on to learning and visualizing that concept, which you otherwise would not be able to do. Like we used to talk about the concept of resistance by showing, tennis balls going in the mud, and then the mud puts resistance on the tennis balls, and that is the concept of resistance. And these are the atoms which are moving. So it can be made very, very contextual with the help of visual elements. And as a teacher, we realize that if you can integrate the best of technology into what you're doing when you're teaching, you make learning much more effective. What you can possibly teach in an hour, you end up teaching it in 10 to 15 minutes in a much more engaging manner. And what we saw in the last 1 year is all stakeholders in education went online literally overnight. And what did not happen for decades happened in weeks, happened in days. And, we couldn't have thought about this in any other period, but I think they beautifully transitioned online. There are enough videos of teachers who went that extra mile to adapt themselves to this whole new format of teaching and learning, and made sure that students continued learning. So it's a paradigm shift. And the best thing would be if a teacher starts to play the role of a mentor. And I mentioned this before, because I feel that the way we can teach visually can help a student retain concepts, but if a teacher is there to mentor the child and be a guide to them in those formative years, then it can actually become a holistic learning experience.
Okay, great. I mean, that's some very interesting insights there. Now we'll shift gears. We'll talk a little bit about you and your own individual journey. Of course, some of that you have already captured. But I know that right at the beginning of your sort of career, once you finished your engineering, etc., I think you had this choice of, remaining a teacher because you love to teach, and then, of course, then Byju's happened. But you also had this option of probably going abroad and doing a master's and so on. So talk to us about this decision to become an entrepreneur, right? I mean, at that stage, probably what society prescribed or expected was maybe something else for you to take a more prescribed path of doing higher education, etc. And this is 2011, 10, 11, when entrepreneurship was only just taking off in India, right? Today, it's much more widely entrenched. So talk to us about the decision.
Yeah, so it's actually even before that. It's 2007-8. Because so 10-11 was when we started doing research for the app. So before that, we used to take classes offline. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you ask me, being the only child of an Air Force doctor and a mother who was in Doordarshan, both working parents, they had huge aspirations. Like at that point of time, going abroad was like the thing to do, once. And I also had an uncle and aunt abroad and my aunt was a biotechnologist. She was eagerly waiting for me. I even got into a university very close to her house. So everything was ready. And then they said, you just come here, and not just that university, top universities abroad, because I had done my undergraduation in biotechnology. I had topped the university. Things were going great. So all set to invest. My parents were ready to invest everything in education, and all of that, continue learning. And then you can, go ahead and look at a job and all of that. But if you ask me that time, I took this decision because when I went into my first class, I taught 100 students who were 4 years younger than me. I wore a sari to look a little bit older because they were just 4 years younger than me. And the kind of impact that I saw that it created. So I was helping them crack an important job entrance exam so that they could get into their dream job. So it's not a very premium, engineering institute kind of thing. It's a very simple one where, they would be the sole breadwinners of their family. So I saw the happiness when they got into that first job. They came to me and they said, what you taught us is what came, and we cleared it. So right from interview trips and how to present yourself and everything, it created an impact. So I said, look, if you're going to create an impact, you don't need, and maybe this is the wrong, group to say this, but then sometimes you don't need a master's degree to do what you're doing later in life. If it was definitely relevant to what I was doing, I would have gone and done it. But because it was a master's in biotechnology, which would anyway not bring me back to teaching what I was going to teach, that's why I took that decision. Now, you take a decision. The important thing is you need support of your family. Of course, initially everyone is going to say, what are you doing? Are you out of your mind? Because, like it's 2007, it's 2008, where nothing is there. Like there's no concept of anything. There is no company. There is nothing. So, but then when you strongly believe in something, and having your own mind really matters. So think a lot. I think I thought a lot before I took a decision. I won't say that, I just overnight took it. I did deliberate. But it's important that once you take that decision, don't think about it again. You'll never have regrets. So once you take a decision, stick to it. So I stuck to that. I stuck to it, and today it's obviously one of the best. It's a very good decision that I've taken. At that time, I didn't know, but I was, it was, and it was not that time. It was not number driven. It was only gut. So I knew that instinct told me that you can create an impact here far more than if you go and come back. Another very one more reason which I wanted to like kind of stay back was that since I was the only child of my parents, I wasn't really in a mind to leave them and God, never stayed away from them. So I'm a very family loving person. So that was also pulling me back, because I knew that if I go abroad to do my master's in biotechnology, only a career there would work out. And my father had a good at least 15 years more in service at that point of time. So there was no way I would retire and come. So that also personally like was, pulling me. I was like, okay, fine. It's really not required to do it now. And I can always do this later. So, if I need to do it, that option is always there. So
sure.
That's
sure. Interesting. Okay. Now, as you started the company, right? I mean, obviously you started this with your husband, Mr. Baiju, and the company is named after him and so on, right? So he is the CEO and so on. So how did you carve out a space for yourself within the company and to the external world as a co-founder?
Yeah, so we started with Baiju's classes. Okay, that was actually the simplest thing to do because Baiju was the teacher. Very unique name. In fact, I still remember the first time I got a reference and they asked me to reach out to him. I couldn't even pronounce it because it's very different. People outside Kerala don't really know the name. Very unique, right? So and in North they say BYJU classes. So that used to still happen when we were conducting our classes in the north of India. It's a very unique name. It was called Baiju's classes because it was his classes. It was his baby. It was his mindset, the way he taught, the way he instilled a confidence in so many people to learn better, to understand that exams are just a bump along the way and not an end goal in itself. So that's how it actually started. And when we came to a point where we had to name our learning app, we knew it's going to be some learning app. So what learning app is something that we didn't know, but since it was based on the same teaching philosophy which we had imbibed, and we were like 4 teachers who were teaching on the app, me, Anita, Vinay, and Baiju himself. So we were the 4 people who were teaching on the Baiju's learning app. So we all 4 students. So we're like, let's just call it Baiju's learning app. It's anyway unique. It's anyway rare. You get trademark very quickly. And if you ask me, it's also a big risk to put the founder's name, right, on a product when you don't know whether it's going to succeed or fail. But the conviction that we had in what we did, I think made us take that decision. And today, if you ask me about the work, it's carving out a space. See, nothing is done by one person alone. It's always a team effort. And everybody, if you speak to me or you speak to 6 people, all of us will have the same voice. And all of us in the founding team know that we are all important in our own way to the company's success. In fact, you know what, Baiju will always say, look, it has my name on it. Don't give me all the credit. I have a team. I don't do anything today. So being that, having that humility, and celebrating everybody's success. So he's given all of us the freedom to rise up to the position of being co-founders in the company, of being our own boss, of implementing our own decisions. So like I said, it's a name. Why is that the name? It's because it has the teaching philosophy which we started with, but it's also very unique, also very distinct, and so it stuck.
Okay. So as you have sort of led this company over the past 10 years, I mean, there must have been many board meetings, important meetings, customer meetings, perhaps. Maybe you were the only woman, right? Talk to us about your journey as a woman leader. What kind of challenges did you face, if you did face any, and how did you sort of overcome those?
So if you ask me, in Baiju's, the diversity is something that there are a lot of girls in the company. So especially even around me, and I've made it a point to surround myself with a lot of women. And I think women generally have a propensity to do that. So even in the board, we have a 33% representation of women. In the top management, it's 4 out of 10. Across levels, it's 40%. So it's a very diverse culture. And there are situations, I'm not denying it, where I am the only woman in the room. But I am someone who strongly believes that, it's not words that speak, but work. So when your work speaks for itself, you will anyway be given an opportunity. And see, there are 2 ways of looking at it. One is saying, oh my God, I'm the only woman in the room. The other way is, I'm the only woman in the room. I'm different. So I'll be heard. So it's about, it's always a glass is half full, half empty kind of a situation. How do you want to perceive it, right? So I've always taken that as an opportunity. That being said, ensure that there is diversity in the company, ensure that there is inclusion at all levels, ensure that voice is heard irrespective of which position you're in the company. And yeah, so I hope that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, to actually celebrate the difference and to actually think of it as an advantage that yes, I am the only woman around, and so I bring a different perspective. And talking about perspective, see, research is very sort of divided on this, right? I mean, there are studies that seem to indicate that yes, women bring something very unique and different as leaders, right? They have a very different leadership style, if you will. But there are also studies that kind of say no, it's the same thing. Leaders are leaders, men or women. That isn't really. So from your own experience, as well as what you have seen around you, what is your take on this? Do women bring something unique in terms of leadership style, or not? And if so, what is it in your view?
Okay, frankly, I haven't thought about it much, but I think it's very similar. I wouldn't say that it's drastically different, because ultimately a leader is a leader. A leader leads by example. Is someone who should not just tell you what to do, but show how it's done. Now, this is irrespective of gender, and it holds good. And if people look up to you irrespective of whether you're a man or a woman, I think that is when justice is served, in terms of once you give equal opportunity, you're out there because of capability and not because of anything else. Now, that being said, are there traits in women which are different? Well, there are studies which show, like, there are enough things which say that women are more empathetic, probably because they also understand that there is something, there is also family, which is very, very important. They would put both on the same pedestal, and they generally have a propensity to multitask better. Okay, so these are all just studies which show, but if you ask me, it's that same multitasking which can come back and bite you, because then you try to do too many things at one point of time. So it's about prioritization. So even as women leaders, now if 10 people come to you with problems, you should not try to solve all 10 together. If you can pick up the top 3 which needs attention first and prioritize that, so the qualities which we have can be used as an opportunity. It can also serve as a challenge. So I think it's about capitalizing on that. And the whole empathy thing, we're living in a time where women have resumed more leadership roles than ever before. So channeling emotional intelligence, nurturing their nurturing nature, all of this, they become the flag bearers of empathetic leadership. And enough examples are there, to prove that. So I think capitalizing on that is different. It's different for women compared to men. But and see, there is also an opportunity today, because in this era where there are so far and so few, more than what is the qualitative difference between a man and woman, I feel a woman can inspire more people. If that can be the example, which we can allow them to be, where more people can get inspired, that look, if she can do it, I can do it. That is something that I want to talk about more than leadership style. So it's like, the fact that both of us are having this conversation, I hope it inspires more people that look, if they can do it, we can do it. Can we also be there? So that is what is required when you bring women leaders or top. Women leaders should inspire more, because there are enough men out there, and if we can have more women out there, it inspires more people.
No, absolutely. I think you're spot on there. And also talking about traits, it's about certain maybe feminine characteristics. It's about empathy. It's about the ability to nurture. And I think that those are important traits that everybody needs to absorb. It's not something that is purely, women's area, but I think it's something for the men out there as well to incorporate into their leadership style. So absolutely spot on. So I also know that you're an avid sports person. I think you're trained in music and so on, and of course you're a mother of 2 boys. How do you manage it all? How do you juggle, and what kind of synergies do you draw, more importantly, between everything else that you do and your career at Byju's, your work at Byju's?
Yes. So especially mothers, they and this is something which I believe in, they put themselves last. and when they do anything that they do, so they put everything else first. They put family, they put work, they put themselves last. And I'm saying this because you said I'm an avid sports person, and I am even today, even though my newborn he's just 4 months old. And that's important, because if you take time out for yourself, and if you're healthy and you're happy, then you will also be successful in both family and work. So that being said, sports has been critical for me right from my very, very young days. My grandparents used to rush me off to a running ground every day. From the time I was 5 years old, I used to make 10 rounds, and I used to go swimming since the age of 5. So completely into sports, and also academically, I've been, emphasized on the importance of reading. uh, my mother used to take me to the British Library over the weekend. So this whole all-round development is something that I think is very important, not just for me, and it's important especially for women, because you educate a woman, you educate a generation. So that's something which is, because we are our children's first teacher. So so that's about that. And yes, I do have many hobbies. Frankly, I'll tell you, I don't sing much, although I did start singing at the age of 5, but that's something that I can do without today. I can't do without taking care of myself physically. I cannot do without working. And so that's what I said, right? It's about prioritizing. You can do 10 things, but then what do you do best? What do you do, and what is most important at that point of time? Like today, the most important thing is the company, the kids, and then making sure that I'm happy. And I do that by surrounding myself with people I love, and that keeps me in a state of mind which keeps me enthusiastic at all points of time, because you always need to be in good spirit to make sure that everybody who looks up to you understands that any obstacle can be overcome. Because there are so many people in my team who are turning into mothers, and it's important to lead by example. They should also know that, look, I can go, I can have a break, and I can come back. Although I came back in 10 days, but I've told everybody nobody's doing what I did. That's the one thing nobody's doing. So you all will go, you all will take a break, and you will come back, and it will be as relevant, or you will do much more. Because the minute you become a mother, you also understand that you need to channel your energies correctly. You need to plan your days appropriately, and you need to give time to the most important things in your life. So yeah, so that's.
Okay, okay, great. So now what we'll do is, it's very fascinating to sort of know that side of you, and how you manage, the work and the family, and who you are as an individual, and what keeps you happy, right, overall. Okay, so one thing that I want to ask you, and we are sort of coming to a close, maybe a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So education is a fundamental right, yeah, and the ethos of education is about imparting knowledge, about nurturing individuals to realize their full potential, and stronger foundation for society, to lay a strong foundation for society. And for times immemorial, education is a sector that's mostly been, with non-profits, right? For example, IIMB is a society. Most schools are trusts and so non-profits. Now, the new generation of edtech companies come from a very different sort of ethos, if you will say, for lack of a better word. Very, very sort of VC funded, profit maximizing kind of lens. So how do you reconcile this? While, inherently education is a social enterprise, right? The business of education is a social enterprise by definition, almost like healthcare. How do you sort of bring these two together? How do you resolve this?
Yeah. So, you rightly said that education is a fundamental right. And Byju's, when we started it, we did it to address the gaps in the education system. And over the years, we've been trying to make a difference in the learning, the way students learn. And we've been staying true to that and doing that. Because here it's all about value creation, and value can be created only when you can do something not just for the motivated few students, but when you can go deep down, when you can do it for every type of learner, to create that kind of a product which will appeal to not just the motivated few, but to a learner, irrespective of whether they're a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner, or every type of learner, to create something that can create value for them, where they use the product not as a reference material, but to gain conceptual clarity. Because the minute you gain conceptual clarity, you learn not just for exams, you start learning for life, because you become a self learner. You need investments to create a product like that. I mean, it cannot be a one-man show where you just like say record and then it's online, or it cannot be about digitizing a textbook. It's way beyond that. So it's about what kind of product do you want to create. Anyway, our goal is beyond numbers, it's beyond sales, it's beyond funding, it's beyond valuation. Our success is measured every time we make a positive impact in the way a child learns, when we make them fall in love with learning. So growth, sales, businesses, all of this is a byproduct of the value creation process. And value comes when you have students who love what you do. To make it and to make that product engaging, you need investments. To create inorganic growth, like I spoke about, you need investments. To create a holistic blended learning experience that puts students in the driver's seat, you need investments. So education, like you rightly said, it's an important part of society. It builds, it shapes the minds of tomorrow. And why? See, the thing is, we also have this sort of friction about investment in education, because it's not something where you'll see a benefit tomorrow. It takes time. It's not like building a shiny bridge and showing a picture and saying this is how it look. It's far more difficult to show the beauty of an educated mind or the brilliance that it can bring. And after all, what we need for the tomorrow is our critical thinkers, our problem solvers. And what we need is not a well-filled mind. We need a well-formed mind. So can we channel their learning in the right direction? You need to think a lot when you create this. It cannot be done by, it just cannot be done by effortlessly, is my point. You need to put a lot of time, lot of effort, lot of investment, both monetary and non, to make it happen. So that's the kind of work that we have put into making this happen. So and as an edtech company, we have the power to help students learn better, because technology can solve problems at scale. And that's also a double-edged sword, if you ask me, because of all the spotlight edtech has been in and the number of companies which are starting up, there is also a chance that quality can drop, because you can just quickly just do something which, for the sake of calling it edtech, it happens. But here it has to be a lot of research which goes into it. So maybe I just want to probably end by saying that edtech is not about digitizing books. It's not about creating one-person videos, especially when the focus is on ensuring concept clarity, creating a love for learning. So the format becomes very, very important when you have 80 million students who are learning from you, where there are different types of learners. You need heavy personalization based on their individual style. There's a lot of data effort. There is a lot of R&D involved. So this continuous R&D is required to ensure that we're also integrating and in track with the latest technology and consistently creating something new, something better, and something more powerful.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, interesting, but how do you see Byju's sort of contributing? I mean, you have made a huge contribution, 80 million learners and all, but then how do you sort of go deeper into the base of the income pyramid in sort of making education, and in this case, online education and this kind of powerful education where students are able to visualize? Where do you see the future of this being accessible to all?
Yes, I think it's a very, very important question, because the thing is, along with the limelight that the sector gets, you also get the power to resolve this. And edtech companies especially can do this at scale. So we launched our Education for All social initiative in November last year. And the overarching goal, the first small milestone that, if you ask me, we have kept for ourselves, is to reach 5 million students by 2025. And we launched the GIVE initiative, which is the first initiative under this umbrella. So maybe I can speak a little bit about it. So what we saw in the pandemic especially is that when schools transitioned online, a lot of students who did not have access to a device missed out even on the online classes that schools were providing. So this idea came from that problem statement, where we said that, look, what if we ask the citizens of the country to donate their device, or to sponsor their old or sponsor a new device, and we load the Byju's courses for free on it. And the Byju's courses can be consumed without internet. So you don't need the internet, you don't need anything. So the program goes for free. We only need somebody to donate an old device. It was a massive hit. It's just been a month and a half. We've already seen 5 lakh students benefiting from it. It's massive. But you ask me, that's just one thing that we can do. There are so many things that we can do, and we've done this through NGOs. We've also done this directly with students who deserve it. And we're working with almost 40 partners across 22 states, with it's America India Foundation, this Save the Children, there is Kotak Education Foundation. There's so many people. So we're tied up with all of these NGOs to make sure that the product is reaching. And what we did is we also launched the product in multiple languages. It's not just available in English. It's available in almost all regional languages so that students can learn in a language which they are comfortable in. We are cognizant of the fact that in tier 3 and tier 4 cities, children may not know English the way we know it. Although it's very aspirational, we give them an option to learn either in English or in their mother tongue. So this is also something that we did, which makes it, much more accessible. So yes, so like I said, it's small baby steps. I really don't talk about it much till we create an impact. I'm speaking about it more because you asked me today. But we see ourselves, we're very, very cognizant that we want, that's always been the mission. Every kind of learner, every student, irrespective of geography, irrespective of the situation that they are in, should deserve learning from Byju's. There are multiple ways we can do it. While there is a business running successfully, while we are continuously focusing and putting in efforts to make the product better, on the other side, can we have students who deserve to learn this way? Can we give them access? And it's definitely possible that both of these can coexist. It's not just us. Any big education company, any big can do this and make an impact.
No, I think, thank you. And I wish you all the best as you sort of chart out that journey, because I think it's very important, as you very well know, for a country like India. I think for every private sector organization, it's also important to sort of understand the broader social fabric that we operate in, and see how we can sort of bring about equitable growth. So I hope Byju continues and does more along those lines, and looking forward to sort of hearing more about that in the future as well. So this has been a great conversation. We are all out on time. Thank you for your energy and enthusiasm. I think it was very engaging and I had a good time. Now we'll open up for a few questions. We are at 12 o'clock. Maybe we had slotted 10 minutes for Q&A. Priscilla, if that's okay, we will, and Divya, if that's okay, if you can stay on for 10 more minutes, we can take a few questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I have posted a question. What are the future ideas you have to deliver the product better?
Okay, the product can be consumed in multiple ways. So it's available literally any format. All it needs is a mobile phone. Now that mobile phone could or could not be connected to internet, it doesn't matter. Like I said, we're also exploring web as an option. But the web version is something that we are doing in partnership with schools, where it could be projected on a big TV, and then the teacher can conduct the class with the help of content. So literally any way, any device that you can imagine. So the product is available to be consumed in that device. And like I said, it's always for us also, we want to make this available wherever possible, in whichever format possible, to as many people possible. So the entry barrier is a very simple smartphone which has a basic 2G connection, because even the videos buffer itself, the internet version, the videos buffer themselves to even make sure that it adapts to the internet speed. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure. Next person, Raja Kumar. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, have you really hired people as employees who got their, scores through Byju's, and then, in case you have done that experiment, how do you find, the impact made by Byju's learning on their success?
Yes. So one very strong, so there are two metrics which speak about the engagement and the effectiveness of the application. The first is, and these are, like I said, and I think I missed speaking about it. These are two numbers that we track even more strongly than all the business numbers and profit numbers and revenue numbers. One is engagement on the application, which went up to 100 minutes per session during the pandemic, and frequently which showed that they were coming back almost every day to learn in this new way. And the second one is effectiveness. Now, how do we measure effectiveness? Because this is something where a child is learning on their own at home. It's not a replacement to school. It is supplemental learning. This is when a child is self-learning. That we measure using renewals. So our renewal rates are as high, because all our products have an annual subscription. The renewal rates are as high as 86%. And this will happen because the parent is the decision maker while the student is the consumer. This will happen only if the parent sees an improvement in learning outcomes. So that these are, and if one more number that which is very important is, but that we track, is the NPS score. And this is, and we do multiple continuous surveys. Apart from that, we've had the biggest and the best partners do surveys for NPS scores, which is as high as 76 for our pitch.
All right. There is a question in the chat that I think you can take, which is the flat structure that you spoke about is very democratic and open for an organization. How challenging is it to keep the structure at Byju's as it keeps growing immensely?
I think in this digital day and age, it's very easy to maintain that structure. Recently, I did a town hall, and I don't think I could have ever done that in the physical world. We would probably have to book an auditorium to do it. So it was very easy to do because it's one click of a button, and anybody anywhere can get connected. So it's important to do it, though. It's easily said that it's easy to do, but then leaders need to proactively do it, where they bring everybody onto one platform, speak about the opportunities that are available in the company, speak about and give people an option, do an ask me anything format where people can ask any question that they have in their mind, being open to it, so that if you take any issue heads on, people feel more comfortable working in your company and feel heard as well. So I don't think this will be a problem, no matter how big we scale, because we are thinking about it. So if we were not thinking about it, it would definitely be a challenge. But since we've always been thinking about it, and if you want to make something possible, I'm sure we can make that happen.
Sure. There are quite a few questions actually regarding leadership, and your based on your experience. So, what are the key things that you would suggest a leader to keep in mind, or a new entrepreneur who's just starting out to keep in mind? And if those things or those traits would actually help them even in the future. So, do they need to imbibe more traits or more, perspectives as they're growing up?
Okay, so maybe I can say a couple of things that worked for us. I don't think I don't think I have the authority to say this is what will work, but I can talk about a couple of things which did work for us along the way. And maybe one is that we've always dreamt big. We've had aspirations which are sky high, but along with dreaming big and having big goals, we've also broken that down, not just into yearly goals, but into weekly goals and daily goals. So we've planned very deep, but we've not planned way ahead, because if you plan too much in the future, your ideas became archaic. So it's important to have big dreams and big aspirations, but also have daily goals, so that you're rooted to what you're doing, and you're in sync with the times, because everything is changing so fast. Like if anybody had asked us 4 years back, where do you see yourself in 2019 or 2020, none of us would have got the answer right. So that is one. And the second thing is, as a leader, when you're an entrepreneur, it's about creating a community of intrapreneurs with you, creating a community of leaders with you who believe in the mission as much as you do. Because like I said, you can start a mission driven company, it's easier to do that, but to stay mission driven, for that you really need to have your skin in the game. You really need to give people the freedom, elbow room to experiment, fail, and then grow. This is the second thing. And I think for women, I think it's an important decision. So if and when you marry, please marry the right person. It makes a whole world of a difference. Is something that I very strongly believe in, and it's not just for me. And even in my team, I've seen that men who support their family in and do a 50-50 in terms of taking care of the kids, those women are able to punch way above their weight in their career. So it is important to marry someone who would not just buy you a diamond ring, but would support you so that you would buy one for yourself. So that's one. And also I think living by first principles, because especially in education, you don't have a rule book or a playbook for success, especially if you're a pioneer in a segment. Now you can, there is so much that can be done. But when we started out, literally the concept of apps was new, the concept of edtech was new. So we wrote our own playbook. It was not a cut copy paste model, and we lived by first principles. We created teams which would otherwise not exist. We created rules which would otherwise not exist. So and I think so, yeah, these 2-3 things is something which immediately comes to my mind.
Okay, so another last question for you. So, about your understanding and take on user experience and content and branding and dealing with any negative feedback that your users have, how would you suggest ways to go around that?
Yes. So see, the thing is, when you grow this fast, you are bound to make some mistakes along the way. But it's important to course correct as quickly as you do, which brings me back to the first thing of what we did. We experimented and we failed. We failed quickly so that we could win big eventually. That being said, positive criticism is something that every growing company should welcome, because everybody makes a share of mistakes along the way, but it's important that you learn and grow from it, because it can make you a bigger and better person. So that being said, student experience is something which is the most critical, because if you have your students on your side, and if they enjoy learning from you, you will, your mission is accomplished. No, so you have to be a very customer first, a very student first organization, and create value for them. And so if you look at any of the teams, be it the product team, be it the tech team, be it the mentoring team, all the teams have one single mission: make sure that the child is using the product to the best potential, and make a product that brings out the best potential in a child.
All right, thank you so much for taking these questions. I know we ran ahead of time. Professor, over to you if you have a few words to say.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Divya, for taking the time and being here with us. I think your insights and your journey, I'm sure, will provide a lot of inspiration I know that there are a lot of women entrepreneurs, women leaders in the making here on the call today. And of course, we have Mr. Sanjay from Goldman Sachs as well. And their organization is doing a whole lot for women entrepreneurship. And, we've been partnering since 2019, and we've supported hundreds of women entrepreneurs, and a lot of them in scaling up.
I would like to thank you all for joining, especially all the panelists that have joined, taken out time to be here. It was lovely having you. And Divya, thank you so much for taking out time to discuss and share your journey. Of course, it has helped a lot of the attendees here. And yeah, thank you so much all for joining.
Thank you. And I think we had a very, very participative group of people who asked us a lot of questions. I'm sorry we couldn't, but I enjoyed answering everything that we could. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Divya.
much for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good day all. Thank you, Yona. Thank you for joining.